Yeshiva Flatbush, please welcome Congressman Ritchie Torres.
Boker Tov, everyone. It's great to see you. It's great to see the energy for our incredible friend, Congressman Ritchie Torres. There's really... As we learned over the weekend, when the United States joined with Jordan and Saudi Arabia and other countries helped Israel to defend it, we learned how important it is to have good friends. And one of our best friends in the entire world is standing or sitting right now, right here, Mr. Ritchie Torres. Now, that would be reason enough to celebrate Mr. Torres and to welcome him to our school. But there's something I want to point out that doesn't get pointed out enough about Ritchie, which is an important lesson for us, having nothing to do with us or Israel or anything else like that. And that is that Ritchie stands with us for a very important reason. And that is because he knows what is the truth and he knows what the right thing to do is. And this is something that's a midah, a character trait, that's not out there enough in the world, and especially not in leadership and politics. Ritchie has every reason to be somewhere else and to be with other groups of people. He's progressive, he's Latino, he's LGBT. All those things for a lot of people are associated with things that are not supportive of Israel. And if Ritchie wanted, he could find plenty of backers and plenty of supporters if he stood on the other side. But Ritchie stands with Israel because it's the right thing to do. And therefore, he is worthy of our celebration. He is worthy of our support. He is worthy of us looking up to him as an incredible role model of what it is to be a great American, a great leader, and a great person. So it is my incredible honor to introduce to you Representative of the District of New York, number 15, Ritchie Torres.
Wow, thank you for the warm reception, and thank you for, those words were so kind, I was convinced my mother wrote them. It's unusual for me to receive a warm applause because for most of my life, no one did not know who I was or even cared who I was. I remember a few years ago, I was outside the Democratic Convention, and I was only a city councilman at the time, and there was a delegate from California who asked for my autograph, and there's nothing more flattering than someone who wants your autograph. It really, it bolsters your ego. And she kept asking me for the autograph, and then she said, wait a minute, you're not Trevor Noah. So this might be one of the few places on earth where I'm more popular than Trevor Noah. I'll just speak briefly about, where I come from. I never thought life would take me on a journey from public housing in the Bronx to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. I spent almost all my life in the Bronx. Brooklyn is my second favorite borough. I was born and raised in poverty. My mother raised three of us on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was $4.25 an hour. And despite all the challenges that I had to face growing up, I got my start in politics as a housing organizer. I ran for public office at age 24. At age 25, I became the youngest elected official in New York City. And then 7 years after my election to the city council, I ran for Congress and became a congressman at age 32. And so I feel like only in America is a story like mine possible. I happen to be a Democrat, but I tell people I'm an American first and foremost. I feel like America is the greatest country on earth. And Bill Clinton once said that there's nothing that's wrong with America that cannot be cured by what's right with America. And I have that same optimism about Israel. There's nothing that's wrong with Israel that cannot be cured by what's right with Israel. And people often ask me, Ritchie, you're not Jewish. You're a black Latino guy from the Bronx. Like, why do you care so deeply about combating anti-Semitism? Why do you care so deeply about defending the world's only Jewish state? And I simply reply, the question is not why have I chosen to speak out? The question is why have others chosen to be silent in the wake of October 7th, in the wake of the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust? Like, I reject the notion that one must be Jewish to combat anti-Semitism. Just like I would reject the notion that one must be black to combat anti-black racism. 60 years ago, there were Jewish Americans who gave their lives for the cause of civil rights. Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, as well as James Chaney, an African American, were all barbarically murdered in the Mississippi burning so that black Americans could live and vote freely unencumbered by the cruelty of Jim Crow. And so for me, the lesson learned from history is that we're all in this together. We all have an obligation to fight anti-Semitism and extremism, no matter what form it takes, and no matter what direction from which it comes. And so you can count on me to be a partner with each and every one of you in the fight against anti-Semitism. When I'm reflecting on October 7th, I'm reminded of the words of Associate Justice Robert Jackson, who was the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. And in his opening statement, he said, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish are so calculated, so malignant, so devastating, that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive it being repeated." And those same exact words should be spoken about October 7th. Israel cannot tolerate October 7th being ignored because the Jewish state cannot survive it being repeated. October 7th was a crime against humanity so barbaric that it must never be repeated and it must never be forgotten. Hamas must be removed from power. And the perpetrators of Hamas must be brought to justice. And I've been crystal clear that Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas and against Iran in the wake of October 7th, just like the United States had a right to defend itself against Al-Qaeda in the wake of 9/11. Right? Self-defense is the right and responsibility of every nation state, including the Jewish nation state. This is not the State of the Union. You should not feel compelled to clap every second. No. I'll end on a final note, which is almost like an Uncle Sam message. Like, we need you. Where there's fear, there can never be freedom. And so the best advice I can give you is never live in fear. Like, never live with shame. Be proud of your Judaism. Be proud of your Zionism. Stand up for your people. We need you because you are the next generation of leaders. The future of the Jewish people and the future of the Jewish state depends on you. Non-Jews like myself, we can be allies. We can supplement what you're doing, but we can never substitute for each and every one of you. You are the next generation of Jewish leadership, and I would just ask you to be fearless, to be forceful, and to be proud, and I will be a champion of your cause. I will be a partner every bit of the way. So with that said, I'm happy to take whatever questions you have, or criticisms, or.
We're going to take a couple of questions, so we'll close. Do we have microphones? We do not, right? Anyone want to ask a question of Congressman Torres? Stand up and be loud. Repeat the question.
People around you who have different views with you on your.
Look, I was asked, how do people whose views differ from mine treat me? Look, I have colleagues who have deep hatred for me because of the principled stand that I take on Israel. But my criticism of most elected officials is that most elected officials have what I would call a neurotic need to be loved by everyone, to be all things to all people. And I have no need to be loved by everyone. Like, for me, it's better to be right than to be loved. And I'm willing to stand up for what I think is right. I'm willing to stand up for what I believe in, even if it means facing criticism and ostracism within my own party, even if it means standing alone. And so my position on Israel has put strain on personal relationships, on political relationships, but I'm willing to make those sacrifices to do what I think is right. I mean, there's no issue on which I face more hate, harassment, and even death threats than on the subject of Israel. My own mother has been the target of harassment. But if I'm not willing to fight for what I think is right, then why am I here? Then why I have no business being in public office if I simply capitulate out of fear. And I often said, and I'll make this one, I feel like the greatest threat to our democracy, the greatest threat to the U.S.-Israel relationship, does not come from the far right or from the far left. It comes from the cowardice of a center that lives in fear of the extremes. And I refuse to live in fear. So.
We have a question. Okay, this is not coming. We're working through, but
Yeah.
we have a question from Frida Novick. Frida, thank you for the question. What factors influenced your love for Israel and to recognize the need to defend Israel?
I was telling a joke earlier. I said to the board members, I once jokingly said to an Israeli that I'm an Ethiopian Jew, and he said to me, "You're not attractive enough to be Ethiopian." So that was my that was my first experience with Israeli bluntness. To be honest with you, for most of my life, I had no opinion on Israel. I grew up in a community that was exclusively Latino and African American. Just about everyone was Christian. So I had no real engagement with the Jewish community. I had no reason to think about Israel. And a turning point came in 2014 when I was a member of the New York City Council, and I was invited by the Jewish Community Relations Council to go to Israel. And when I went to Israel, it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Going to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, going to the Masada, where Jews committed mass suicide to escape enslavement at the hands of the Roman Empire, and going to the Gaza envelope. I remember speaking to the local mayor of Sderot in the Gaza envelope, who said to me that the majority of his children struggle with post-traumatic stress because families like his live under the threat of relentless rocket fire. And so I thought to myself, imagine the trauma of a 5-year-old Israeli seeking refuge in a bomb shelter while rockets are being fired and sirens are going off and adults are panicking. I come from a rough place in the Bronx where people live in fear of guns, of gun violence. But no one in America lives in fear of rockets. No one here worries that Mexico and Canada are going to fire rockets into American homes and communities. And so my experience in Israel 10 years ago enabled me to have empathy, not only for the plight of the Jewish people, but for the complex security situation confronting Israel. And I tell people, before you rush to pass judgment on Israel, you should actually go there. You should see the facts on the ground with your own eyes. And I guarantee you that you will come to develop a view of Israel that is far more complicated than the caricature that percolates on college campuses and on social media platforms.
We got a couple more questions. We have time for a few more questions. We have a girl. Yes, go ahead. Shirley, go ahead. Stand up.
How do you plan to combat all the things you see online, all the posts and the propaganda that are
Can I do a poll? How many of you are aware of the TikTok legislation in Congress? Okay. Okay, just about everyone. Okay. Okay, so I want to ask, raise your hand if you support the legislation. Wow. Raise your hand if you oppose the legislation. Okay, so I take it that most of you oppose it. So I will do my best to persuade you, and I might fail. First, I have to set the record straight. The legislation is not a ban on TikTok. It is a divestment. It forces a sale of TikTok. So here's our concern. TikTok is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is a company based in China. It is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, which is an adversary of the United States. And under Chinese law, ByteDance is required to collect vast quantities of information about the 170 million American users on TikTok and to share that information, your private information, with the Chinese government upon request. And we in Congress consider that a national security risk. So we're not targeting the free expression on TikTok. We're targeting hostile foreign ownership. And I was explaining to the board members earlier that, you know, our concern is that TikTok is not only a social media platform, but it's the leading news source for the next generation of Americans. And the fact that we're putting our leading news source in the hands of our leading foreign adversary is a threat to national security. You know, raise your hand if you think during the Cold War we should have allowed a Soviet company to own ABC, NBC, and CBS News. Raise your hand if you believe that. So if we would not allow a Soviet company to own ABC, NBC, and CBS, then why should we allow the Chinese Communist Party to own TikTok? If it were owned by an American company, I would have no objections. But I'm not going to allow a foreign government to wage information warfare against the American people, to steal your private information, and to amplify anti-Semitism. And we've seen an outbreak of anti-Semitism on the streets of New York, on college campuses. And that is not happening in a vacuum. That is caused by the disinformation and misinformation that is percolating on platforms like TikTok. So I hope you can keep an open mind. So.
It's time for one or two more questions. Go ahead. Stand up loud.
How do you balance supporting Israel, but also for stability, like peace and diplomacy in the region?
Peace and diplomacy, supporting Israel, and
How do you make decisions that's good for Israel, but also appeases the other side?
well, I mean, I support Israel because Israel is a force for peace and prosperity in the Middle East. Look, I feel like there's a power struggle. Here's my view of world politics. There's a power struggle between the free world, led by the United States, and what you might call the axis of evil or the axis of aggression. That includes countries like China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. Right? We have like 4 battlegrounds for the Cold War between the United States and China. Right? There's China's aggression toward Taiwan on the Taiwan Strait. There's North Korea's aggression toward South Korea on the Korean Peninsula. There's Russia's aggression toward Ukraine in Europe. And then you have Iran's aggression toward Israel, not only directly, as we saw recently, but indirectly through a network of terror organizations like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. Right? Israel is the most stabilizing force in the Middle East, whereas Iran is the most destabilizing force in the Middle East. And the greatest proof that Israel is a stabilizing force is the Abraham Accords. Right? The Abraham Accords is a peace agreement between Israelis, Jews, and Arabs, which would have been unimaginable for most of human history. Right? Saudi Arabia is on the verge of normalizing relations with Israel, and if it happens, it would mean the end of the Israeli-Arab conflict. It would mean the birth of a new Middle East. And so I feel like Israel has brought the world closer to realizing the Abrahamic, what I call the Abrahamic dream of all the children of Abraham, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, living in peace and prosperity. Israel is the greatest defender of that vision, and the greatest threat to that vision is Iran, is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
We have time for one more question. I actually want to move away from Israel because I know you have another powerful message about something else, and that is...
I only speak about Israel.
Is you face a lot of adversity, you face setbacks in your life. Do you have a message for teenagers about facing adversity, overcoming setbacks?
Okay, I will share some personal details, and hopefully about probably more than 15 years ago, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had dropped out of college because I found myself struggling with depression. There were moments when I was even abusing substances. There were moments when I thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the world around me had collapsed. Like more than 15 years ago, I was a fundamentally broken person. And I rebuilt my life, and I never thought 7 years later I'd become the youngest elected official in America's largest city, and then 7 years later become a member of the United States Congress. And so I tell people, even in your moment of greatest hardship, never lose hope. Never lose hope. You know, I'm living proof that you can overcome improbable odds and achieve what might have been unimaginable. And I don't know if I could share a story from Israel. I know I'm prohibited from speaking about Israel, but you know, when I went to Israel more than 2 weeks ago, and it was depressing and inspiring at the same time. It was depressing because, you know, I went to the south. I went to the kibbutz Nir Oz, where 1/4 of the population had either been abducted as hostages or murdered, and most of the homes were burned to the ground. But it was also inspiring because I met a gentleman by the name of Ophir, who was one of the producers of the Nova Music Festival. And Ophir has seen a level of suffering in his life that most of us cannot even imagine. He lost hundreds of his friends in the massacre. He suffered multiple gun wounds. In fact, when he was speaking to me, he was visibly limping because he was recovering from his injuries. And despite everything that he had suffered, he was smiling. He had never lost hope. He had an indomitable optimism about the future of both Israel and the Jewish people. And he was wearing a tag that read, "We will dance again." And so the story of the Jewish people is a story of rebuilding and rebirth in the face of improbable odds. And I left Israel as confident as ever that Israel will dance again. So.
Ritchie, at the yeshiva, we're really proud to be Americans and really proudly Zionistic. We're going to conclude our assembly with both anthems, the national anthem of the United States of America and Hatikva. So we're going to ask everyone to stand, and then after the anthems, you can go to lunch. So.